Any questions about access issues or the blended program or anything about what we've said so far? Right, I'll just pause a minute, and if you've got any questions, ask them now, right, before we start the content. Right? Yeah, just put your question in chat. Don't worry about raising your hand. It's just one more thing to monitor. So just put your question in chat. No, there is no recording of sessions. That is forbidden by Google policy. That is not the point of these sessions, to record them and listen again. Because if you want pre-recorded sessions to listen to, that is what these green items are. They are scripted, professionally produced self-study modules on different aspects of Google Cloud, right? So that is the material you should be listening to, not me, right? Okay, any other questions? When will you get access? I don't know. It's not up to me, so sorry, I can't give you a time frame. And remembering that the form you request access from is this one here, right? Usually it's fairly quick, but it does depend. This is kind of an awkward time for US because they're still on their weekend. So it may be a little slower, but I'll send the link. For Google Hands-on Labs, do you need to log on with HCL? You need to log on into Cloud Skills Boost with your HCL logins, but each time you run a lab, you get a separate account to use, right? So you get a temporary Google account created. That will be explained in this first lab that we're going to do in the second hour. Right? Now, can I just get people also to put in chat what their level of Google Cloud experience is? Is it 0? Just put one of these answers. You don't have to elaborate. 3 months or more, 6 months or more. So just put one of those 3 answers in the chat as to what your current level of Google Cloud experience is, just so I know. Right? Okay, so quite a lot of zeros. That's okay, but one thing I would stress, if you have 0 experience, is to start the pre-work. Don't worry too. Okay, let me just explain the co-study requirement on week 1, right? So what we're going to do in the second hour is we're going to do this first lab, or you're going to do this first lab, because that will explain how the on-demand lab environment works. And you must understand that, because that's your basic learning tool, right? So that is a very important lab for new people, right? Preparing for your ACE journey, if you are brand new to Google Cloud, I would not worry about that.
Hi, good morning, sir.
What that does
सर
is
ये
that
ना वीडीआई
asks
में
you
मेरा
a
ना कुछ
lot of
सर्टिफिकेट अपडेट होने
diagnostic
के लिए आया था,
questions
देखिए
to
आप स्क्रीन,
ascertain your
और जब मैं
level of
इसको
knowledge.
सर्टिफिकेट
But
अपडेट
if your
करने
level
लगी
of
तो
knowledge
उन्होंने
is 0,
2 पे किया
then
था,
there's not a
लास्ट
lot of
वाला
point
4 हो गया,
finding
5
out you
वाले
have
पे
0
करने लगी तो
knowledge
वो
if you
सर्टिफिकेट
already
को
know you
अपडेट
have
नहीं
0
कर
knowledge,
रहा,
right?
कॉन्टैक्ट टू
So
एडमिनिस्ट्रेटर बोल रहा है और मेरे पास
for
एडमिन
new
राइट्स नहीं है।
people, you should go straight to the core infrastructure fundamentals, right? Because that will give you a common
अच्छा ये सभी लोग
vocabulary. That'll give you the basics of Google Cloud, right? And
काम
the
चलेगा, सब
essential
कुछ ठीक
Google
होएगा।
Cloud infrastructure is more basics, right?
या अच्छा ठीक है।
If you are brand new to Google
नहीं
Cloud,
था कि मैंने
the
कहा पता नहीं
sooner
बार-बार
you
अपडेट
can
आ रहा है
get
तो करना है
some
कि नहीं करना है इसलिए।
basics under your belt, the better,
ठीक है।
right? So
ठीक
I
है, अगर
would
कोई इश्यू आएगा
try
तो
to
मैं आपको
do
कॉल
that
करूँगी।
core infrastructure in the next
ओके, थैंक यू
day
सो
or so,
मच, बाय
right?
बाय।
For those of you who do have experience in Google Cloud, you can do the preparing for your ACE, because those diagnostic questions will help you understand what your current level of knowledge is and where the gaps are, right? So that is not really a course, that is a set of diagnostic questions. But for newbies, I would say go straight to the fundamentals and do that as soon as you can, right? Just so you have the basics of Google Cloud, right? Because otherwise, you know, when we're talking about these things in the lectures or in our workshops, it'll be you won't have a clue about what's being talked about. So the sooner you can do those fundamentals, the better. Okay, so questions about that? Okay, no questions. So we will move on, right? Okay, so we've talked about accessing content, and this is kind of just re-emphasizing the point that, you know, it's on you to do the co-study requirement, right? It's simply attending the workshops. I mean, it's helpful, but it's not likely to get you through the exam, right? That's not the way the program was designed. Now, a couple of people said they have experience with other clouds, such as AWS. So one helpful link that, again, I will send you is, I'll send you the link, then I'll explain what it is. So if you have a look at this link, what this is a high-level comparison of Google Cloud services with AWS or Azure services, right? Because one of the problems we have in cloud when we're new, or even at any time, frankly, is there's so many services. You know, there's about 140 Google Cloud services. So the first requirement we have is to understand what those services are for, right? So if you have Amazon experience, for example, and you hear about a Google Cloud product called Cloud Build, you know that it's similar to these Amazon products or these Azure products, right? Similarly, if you hear about Anthos, you know it's somewhat similar to blah, 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 right? So if you have previous experience, this kind of cross-reference can be helpful, right? Again, they are not detailed comparisons, they are just approximate comparisons, right? Now, the other thing is, if you don't have experience with other clouds, but you still want a quick guide to the products, this link is also helpful, because this link just has a brief introduction to the products. And you see the products here are grouped by category, right? So, for example, if we click on compute, we've got things like App Engine, Bare Metal, Batch, and so on, right? So, and you can see they have very brief definitions of them, but then if we want more detail, we can click on them, right? So again, you know, with public cloud, it's how do you eat an elephant scenario? How do you eat an elephant one bite at a time, right? So basically you learn on a need to know basis. So if you hear a mention of Cloud Run and you're not sure what it is, you can look up it in the product section and see, oh yes, it's a compute product and it's a fully managed environment for running containerized apps, right? So, you know, it just kind of helps get you orient yourself, right? So that can be a useful resource as well. Okay, so I think that's, and again, here's some other learning resources. We'll see, we talked about the product list. Also, the Cloud Girl, that's a developer advocate. You might have seen some of her sketch notes, as she calls them, on different aspects of GCP. So a lot of people like these because they're colorful and informative, right? So they're certainly very popular. So again, you might find that a helpful resource as well to just orient yourselves, right? Because, that's the first kind of task, to kind of figure out what is what. Right? Okay, but from an ACE point of view, again, I won't go through the exam guide in detail, but generally the focus of the ACE is what I would call core, C-O-R-E, core cloud capabilities, compute, storage, and a bit of networking and security and monitoring, right? So a lot of the sort of artificial intelligence or data analytics is not directly in scope for ACE. Again, if you want to know what is in scope, of course, go to the exam guide on the certification site that I showed you before. Okay, so let's talk about one of the better understood services in Google Cloud, Compute Engine, right? And you'll see that if we look at the exam guide, we have a number of objectives that relate to Compute Engine, right? So first of all, how do we create an instance at the console? How do we create an auto-scaled instance, et cetera, right? So first thing we're going to talk about is management interfaces to Google Cloud, right? So when you're using Google Cloud, or when you'll be using Google Cloud, you'll mainly be using the Google Cloud Console. You'll be using the command line interface as well, called Cloud Shell, but you'll mainly be using the console, right? So if we want to use the console, again, if I go to this other profile, you'll see, well, let's just close that and just, so basically I need to go to console.google.com, and you'll see I've been taken into a project, right? Now, I've been taken into that project because I'm an authorized person on that project. If I sent that URL to you, you would not be able to access it because you are not an authorized person, right? So basically, it's up to the owner of the project who has access to the project, right? But in this case, I do have access because I'm actually the owner, right? So then if I want to create a Compute Engine instance, I can choose that service. I can choose create instance. And then I have a number of decisions to make about my VM. First of all, what region or zone is it going to be in? So a region is where Google Cloud has data centers, right? So basically there's regions all around the world. I think there's about 40 regions now, right? So mainly Europe, all over Europe, North America, some in South America, even some in Africa, and of course Asia Pac, right? And Middle East as well. So first of all, I need to choose where I'm going to put my VM, which Google Cloud data center is it going to be in. Then I have to choose how much memory, how much CPU do I want my VM to have? And of course, what I choose here will determine the cost, right? Because I can, I basically, if I choose a relatively more high-end VM, that's going to cost more. If I choose a relatively low-end VM, it's going to cost less, right? So remember, cloud is pay for what you use, right? And then I can choose things like my operating system. So again, I can choose Debian, or if I want to change that, I can change it to other operating systems and so on, right? Then I can choose things like how much persistent disk I have, right? So every instance needs to have at least a boot disk, but I might want to have other disks as well. And I can increase the size of that boot disk if I want to, right? So basically I can just go ahead and create that virtual machine, and that will then start running in my project, right? So again, it only takes a minute or so to create a virtual machine. And because it's a Linux virtual machine, if I want to connect to it, I've got to connect to it via SSH, right? So we'll see that I can do that directly from the console. So again, if we click on refresh, there's our instance. It's now running. So you see now I can SSH into the instance. Remember, it's a Linux instance, so it'll take me into the local Linux image. So just asking me to authorize the request. And now I'm in at the instance, right? So again, if I do ls or pwd, you'll see I'm in at that Linux instance. Right? Okay, now that's so that's one way of interacting with Google Cloud, and you know that'll be you'll be using consoles a lot. You'll be given your own project to work with, and you'll be creating and managing resources through the console. The other way is through Cloud Shell, right? So Cloud Shell is a command line interface into my project, right? So if I want to use command line tools, I need to start up Cloud Shell, right? So, and again, because I haven't used this project for about a week or so, it's just bringing back the little instance that represents the Cloud Shell functionality. So we'll just wait for that to come back. Shouldn't take too long. Okay, it's just connecting now. Okay, so now it's connected. Sorry, I'll get to the question in a minute. Just let me go back here. Okay, so now if I want to list all the instances in my project, I can enter the appropriate command and then it should show me the instances in my project, right? Now, again, I can also do things like list all the storage buckets in my project. So again, I can either do that from the command line here by entering the appropriate command. So they're all my buckets, or I can have a look in the console, right? So if I have a look in the console, and again, I can choose different projects because I might have access to multiple projects and I can see different results for different projects. Right? Now, what about if I want to interact with these resources programmatically? Well, now again, you won't be doing much of this in the ACE, but if you're a developer, you might want to interact with the cloud environment programmatically, right? So what I've got here is what's called the API Explorer, which is usually used by developers to test API calls, right? So let's say I want to list all my storage buckets. I could find the appropriate API and I can from here, I can put in my project ID and then I can run that query, right? Just like I did through the console or through the command line. Choose an authorized person. And you'll see that if I scroll down here, my query has been successful and I've got a JSON object being returned with all the buckets in my project, right? So they're just the different ways I can interact with Google Cloud. And the fourth way, which I won't show you, but I can also interact via a mobile phone app, but I don't have full functionality, right? But when you're doing your labs, you'll be using methods 1 mostly, the console, but you'll also be using Cloud Shell for some of the labs as well. You won't be using the APIs and you won't be using the mobile app, right? Okay, so let me just see. I think there was a question. Look. Well, a project just gets created by a person who has the privileges to create a project, right? So, for example, if I wanted to create a project, a new project, I could, so you see these are all my projects, but you see here I could just click on new project and I could create a new project. Again, I won't do it, but as long as I've got the permissions, I can create the project. So a project is just a grouping of resources, right? But you do need the permissions, right? Okay, so we saw that the console gives us web-based interactions. The SDK is a set of command line tools. And we saw, for example, I ran this command before. So basically, Cloud Shell gives us command line access to resources, right? And the APIs, not that you'll be using them in this course, but the APIs shows what APIs are available and how we can run them, right? Again, mainly of interest to developers, right? So we saw how we could run those APIs, right? Now, I also have for different programming languages, I have client libraries that I can use. For example, if I bring up a little Python application here, so this is just bringing up a Python application that's running on my desktop machine, or will be running on my desktop machine. And you'll see here, all this does is list all the buckets in a project, right? So again, if I just run that here, and you'll see again, it's listed all the buckets in my project, right? So you can of course make those API calls from your programs as well, but again, not in the ACE, right? So again, there's a Node.js example, but we don't need to dwell on that, right? And we talked about the mobile app as well. The mobile app has limited functionality, but it is available for both Android and iPhones. Okay, now the next thing we're going to talk about is the different compute options that we have in Google Cloud, right? So normally, and again, this is a little bit different from a host environment. Sorry, was there a question? Okay, so well, how can you get a list of commands in GCP? Well, most of the commands are G-Cloud commands, right? So if you look for, like, if you look in the documentation, most of them are G-Cloud, not all of them, because, for example, with cloud storage, I use GSUtil, but this will give you a guide to G-Cloud commands. So, 90% of the commands have the prefix G-Cloud, right? Yeah, so that is correct. But some services have their own command line, as somebody is saying. GSUtil is for cloud storage, BQ is for BigQuery, but most of the services use G-Cloud. So you can look at your G-Cloud documentation. Okay. And what is the difference between G-Cloud and GSUtil? Well, GSUtil is only for cloud storage, right? G-Cloud is a more general command, right? Okay. Okay, so now we're going to talk about the different compute options. So we've already talked about Compute Engine, but we do have other compute options that we will talk about in the later sessions, things like Google Kubernetes engines, Cloud Run, and Cloud Functions, right? So we've got different compute options. So what we need to do is we need to kind of understand the capabilities of each compute option and decide which one is good for our application, right? And again, there's one of those GCP sketch notes I was talking about. Right? So compute engine, which is virtual machine based, as you saw, that is a good choice when I'm moving applications from on-premises, because typically those on-premises applications are based around virtual machines, or my application itself requires me to choose particular operating systems, right? So if my application that I want to run is a virtual machine-based application, Compute Engine is a good service. And there's different, again, this is just for documentation, just for information, but there's different machine types. So sometimes I want more CPU relative to memory. Sometimes I want more memory relative to CPU. So so-called compute optimized or memory optimized. So I've got different types of virtual machines that I can choose when I create the virtual machine, even using different types of processor. Right? For example, we've got the so-called Tau family, which again is a type of virtual machine. And again, this one is based on the AMD processors rather than the Intel processors. Right? But we've also got some machine types which are optimized for CPU. So if our workload is very CPU intensive, maybe we want a compute optimized machine type, right? So if we're running games or simulations, things that require a lot of CPU power, then we can choose one of those types. Right? But in other cases, like for databases, or if we're running in-memory analytics or something like that, then we prefer to have more memory relative to CPU. So the point is I can choose different type of CPU based on the workload that I want to run on my virtual machine, right? Okay, and I can also add hardware accelerators like GPUs, right? So if we have, and again, we'll talk about custom machine types as well, but let's have a look at if I want to add a GPU. So let's say I'll go back to my virtual machine and I'll go back to my DevOps project where I created the other one. So again, I'll delete that one. And let's just have a look at some of the options here when we create a new one, right? So let's say we want to get a GPU, right? So you'll see here, I have the option of configuring my GPU. Now, just keep an eye on the cost here. If we choose a GPU, so that's kind of like a processor optimized for certain types of mathematical calculations. But you'll see that my cost has gone up quite a lot, right? Because GPUs are expensive resources, right? So I need to think whether I require one or not, right? But the point is, if I do require one or more, I can choose them, right? So that's an example of customizing my VM for a particular workload, right? Now, the other thing I can do here is I can either choose a preset VM, 1 CPU, 2 CPU, 4, 8, 16. But what about if I want something in between 8 and 16, right? Let's say I want 12, right? So what I can do there is choose custom, right? So with custom, I can choose exactly how much memory and how much CPU I want. I don't have to choose one of the preset types, right? Okay. Okay. Now, the other thing we can also do is choose what is called a spot VM. Now, compared to a standard VM, a spot VM is highly discounted, like between 60 to 90% cheaper. The only problem with spot VMs is that they may or may not be available when I want them, depending on whether there is excess compute capacity in the Google data center at that time, right? So if there is, I can get it. If there isn't, I can't. But again, if I can, it's going to be a very cheap alternative. Now, the other thing about a spot or preemptible VM is that Google can withdraw them at 30 seconds notice. So again, my workload needs to be tolerant of that fact, right? Okay. Okay. So again, but other than the fact that it may or may not be available and it can be withdrawn at short notice, preemptible spot VMs are very similar to standard VMs, right? And again, if this idea of preemptible or spot VMs is a little bit misty to you, check out the link about the use cases for the spot VMs. Okay. Well, look, it's just coming up to the hour. So what we're going to do is we take a break. So what we're going to do is I'll put up a 12-minute timer and we will take a break there. And I think after the break, we will do our first lab. Thanks.
हेलो।
Yeah, hello. Hello. Yeah, I can hear. Okay, share the screen. Actually, I give the admin rights. Okay. Yes, I can see your screen. So actually maybe
So what we're going to do now is we are going to do a lab, but the lab we do will depend on your level of experience, right, with Google Cloud. So if you have never used Google Cloud or Quick Labs before, so Quick Labs is the on-demand lab environment, you should do this lab. So I will send you the link. So this is for people who have never done a Google Cloud lab before, right? So, oops, sorry, wrong link. Just let me make sure that I got it here. Copy that. So this is for people who've never done a lab in Google Cloud. So you are going to do the first lab in the learning path, right? So let me just I'll just put the instructions up here. So this is for new people. You know what I mean by that. Or if you have some experience with Google Cloud, you can do another lab, which I will send you, which is this one, creating a virtual machine. Right? So again, you only have to do one of these labs. So I'll send you the link for this one as well. So what I want you to do is choose one of the labs based on your level of experience. So this is the second link. And I want you to read the labs carefully. I mean, particularly this one is a very important one to understand if you are new to it, right? So just read it through carefully. And I will put myself on mute and I'll give you some time to complete that lab. So what I'll do, I will give people 35 minutes to complete one of those labs. Right, and what we will do is we will review the lab at, say, 10:45, right? But I want you all to attempt to complete a lab now. So in your own time, do one of those two labs. Again, if you have, and again, before you access the lab link, you need to be logged on to partner.cloud skills boost. But please complete that lab in your own time. It's important that you do hands-on as well as theory. Thanks.
ये पापा बन गए, चाचा बन गए, ताऊ बन गए, भाई हमारा ताऊ बन गया। इतनी घनघोर बेइज्जती, अपनी उम्र कम कर रहा है, घनघोर बेइज्जती करती है। लड्डू भाई सर, और भी धर्मेंद्र, किससे बात कर रहे हो? ये भी मेरा ही काम है ना? हाँ, साल भर का फिर कभी आपको मेल डाली थी, माय डेस्क कैसा करना है? बिल्कुल सर, वो डाल दी थी सर, एक्सेस नॉट अलाउड। ये जो रीजन दिया है ना, और ये जहाँ जा रहा है, हाँ, है तो असर आना शुरू हो गया, ऐसा बोल रहे हो? नहीं नहीं, ये कह रहा है कि वहाँ कुछ तो होना चाहिए था, पीने पीने पिलाने का। कहाँ पे जा रहा है? गुजरात में। इसका पक्का इलाज करके भेजेंगे, जब भी भेजेंगे वहाँ पे मिल जाएगी सर। मुकुल को बोलूंगा अब इंतजाम कर दें। मुकुल खुद का इंतजाम तो कर नहीं पा रहा, तुम्हारा इंतजाम करेगा। अरे वो उसके लिए थोड़ी हिम्मत तो चाहिए। तो यूज मी बिकॉज़ अरे खुद तो मैंने एक दिन संडे को फोन कर दिया, माइग्रेशन के लिए गया था। वसीम भाई पिछली बार हम लोग गए थे ना, तो कितना ड्रामा किया था, मेरे लिए कुछ नहीं लेके आए, तुम पूछ तो रहे थे, ये वो किया था ना हमने, जब हम तीनों गए थे आप, मैं, अब की बार मैंने संडे फोन कर दिया, मैंने कहा भाई क्या लेके आना चाहिए, कहाँ से ड्यूटी फ्री से तो लेके आना होगा भाई, से पीने को पिलाने का। नहीं 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 कुछ नहीं चाहिए मेरे को। क्या होता है काम बाद में बात समझ गए ना? उसका रीजन है या घर पे और गेस्ट आए हुए हैं, ठीक है, उसको समाज में रहना है, ये अकेले रहना है। ठीक है, वहां से लेके तुम गए थे क्या? घर गए हुए थे ना? अच्छा, घर गए हुए थे। सब क्या गए? चंपा के पानी का लड़की बता है। सुपर काम चल रहा है, देखो नया वो जो अपना ट्रेन से गए थे ना? ट्रेन से गए ना, ट्रेन से वापस आ गए, ट्रेन से गए थे, ट्रेन से एक्सेल खुली है, दोबारा जाना है, एक्सेल खुल रही है, एक्सेल खुल रही है, एक्सेल खुल रही है, एक्सेल अभी भी खुली रही है 7 तारीख। हाँ, है वसीम साहब, मत चल रहा है गूगल क्लाउड वाला बात, देखो एक्सेल खुल रही है, 13 KB की एक्सेल खुलने में खुली रही है, अभी तक खुली नहीं है, वाइट टू बी नोटिफाइड, ठीक है, पता नहीं सिस्टम की समस्या है कि ट्राई खुल जाए, ट्राई में कैसे होगी, ठीक है, कॉन्टैक्ट आप जो आपने बात किया था शेयर नहीं ड्राइव अपनी गूगल क्लाउड वाली डिपार्टमेंट ड्राइव तो ऐसे नहीं पता है, खुल रहा है, देखो डाउनलोडिंग खुली रही है, बता रहा हूँ फिर वाले बहुत मारेंगे, प्रोजेक्ट ड्राइव जैसे हुएगी। 1 GB वाला जब होगा तभी उसके बाद ही करना पड़ेगा, अब उसको आगे लगी पड़ी इनका बस चले अभी कंपनी खत्म खुल ही रही है, खुल गई अपडेट करके पूरी खुली है, आधी ऐसी फाइल खोलो जिसमें मल्टीपल रेफरेंस हो, फाइल को आपको अंदर एक्सेस है इसमें, आपको अंदर एक्सेस है, हटा दी तो मेरी हटा दी थी उन्होंने, हटाई नहीं है वो हट गई, जीआईडी बताना भाई, यहाँ पे बस भाई उसका वो स्विच आ गया उसने लिया 3 की मैं मंगवा रहा हूँ सर्विस से काटे रहेगा उसने 3 दिया है हमने तो 3 निकाल दिया था अपने यहाँ ये रिस्क है और उससे खर्चा भी तो नहीं करना चाहते हैं मैंने बात ऐसे ही पैसे आईटी की पूरी चीज पैसे बचा रहे हैं तो वो चीज तो मैंने इनविटेशन तक जाने भेजा नहीं जा रहा बंद करो इनके एक्सेस सर चलो अपना नंबर बताना भाई मोबाइल नंबर 7499 या तो फिर अभी यहाँ निकाल करो मैं आपको लिस्ट देता हूँ आप सबको ऐसे ही करो सबके लिए हम सॉफ्ट लिंक क्लिक कर दो ऐसी नहीं होगी ताकि बताओ क्या चीज आपको सितंबर में तो 30 ही दिन होते हैं ना वही चीज तो आप मुझे बताओगे ना सामने बताओगे तो फिर आप पैसे को कानून लगा के लग जाते थे तो देख ही लिया मैंने ना अब तक ये ऐसे नहीं करोगे वैसे नहीं करोगे राम 6 दिन तक था थोड़ा थोड़ा ही बताना था एक बात पता अगर मैं जा पाता तब तो मैं कर लेता नहीं जा पाया बहुत पैसे 500 दिया मैंने सबसे पहले मैंने आपको ये दिया था कौन सी से आपको दिया क्या लग रहा था नहीं बात इसलिए तो नहीं बता मोटा मोटा हो जाएगा ये मैंने मैनुअली टाइप करा था पांच ऑप्शन दिया था थोड़ा सा टाइट हो तो क्या होगा सुबह रखी तो स्प्रे वाली
मीटिंग है इधर। ट्रेनिंग है सर।
Okay, well, I also have to see your project details. So if you bring up your QuickLab instructions. Okay, so your lab ID there is GCP 02384 blah, blah, blah. Okay, so go back to your environment. Okay, but you see if, so just click on the orange S to see who you're signed on as. Okay, so why don't you use a incognito link? So go back to the lab instructions and just right mouse click on the open Google Console, right mouse click and then open an incognito window, right? No, where it says open Google Console on the left, right mouse click and then open an incognito window. And you'll see the credential is populated automatically. Click on next. You need to go back and get your password. Okay. Okay, and you'll have to. And then what was the first instruction you were trying to do? So then if you go back to your lab instructions.
I'm audible? Yeah, hi, Abhijit this side.
So go back to your lab instructions.
Okay.
And what was
This one?
this? Yes, that is your lab instructions. You can close the other tab. You can close close that one and just use the incognito one.
Okay, 1 second.
Because now you're in the correct project with the correct user.
So I mean, I'm not an experienced one, but the thing is that I was just trying to
Well,
search
you
all the
can't,
options.
okay, so you can't deviate from the instructions in the lab. If you try and do that, your account will be suspended, right? So you need to follow the instructions in the lab and not
Okay.
create other resources. It's not a,
Okay.
and that's important for everybody else to understand. You can't deviate from the lab instructions and create other resources because that is not the purpose of the lab. So if you do that, they may suspend your account. You'll have to email them to get you to reset it.
So I'll keep that in mind. Yeah.
Okay, sure. Okay, no problem. Thanks.
Thank you.
करी और वो मशीन उससे फंक्शनैलिटी से कनेक्टेड थी SWNGP01_C करके अगर इसका मिलना है मेरे पास यार सर ये तो कनेक्ट हो गई मैं कहाँ पे कह रहे थे तो नेट साइट बंद कर दी मैंने कहा वहाँ पे सेकंड फ्लोर तेरा हाँ वो का वहाँ पे लफड़ा है देखते हैं कॉन्फ़िगरेशन इसको लगा देते हैं अपने को अब है यहाँ कौन सा सर ये वो है वाला है डेटा सेंटर में ऊपर वाला हटा देते हैं ना ऊपर वाला अच्छा ये रहा ना सही है मेरी आईडी सब की वही है गलत है हाँ किसकी डली पता नहीं देखो मैं यही क्या है तेरा नाम नंबर गुप्ता ये हाँ, ये B48X उसकी डली है अश्वनी की नाम चेंज कर दिया होगा ये भी रह गई ये भी तो लास्ट में ही करी है उसमें भी गलत थी इस वाले में हाँ तो गलत थी इसमें तो सेंड की ही नहीं थी ना तो हाँ तभी नंदा जी की ठीक है मेरी ठीक है प्रतीक भाई की ठीक है राजेश भाई की ठीक है नितिन की ठीक है धर्मेंद्र
हाँ सर
धर्मेंद्र की भी गलत है
Z004RVAM
गलत है इसमें अरे गलत है धर्मेंद्र की
गलत है
डली हुई है 48X वाली जैक ही है भाई 48X धर्मेंद्र और एक्सेल खुल रही है धर्मेंद्र की ठीक हो गई आती है फोन फेंक रहा था दरवाजा खोल के दारू पिए ऐसा किलर लेंगे सर आप नहीं यही रखा होगा नहीं डाल दिया मैं बैग में डाल दी इसीलिए जब कोई आगे देख ले क्या कर रहे हैं तो दादा वो तो नहीं बनना फिर राजेश भाई को वही डाल के देंगे राजेश भाई वोट का देखो राजेश भाई लड्डू खाओ यार बोला हम बात ही नहीं करे फोन काट दो 26 की रात में 26 की रात में 26 की रात में हुआ कितने बजे शाम को 7 बजे हुआ मैं कांग्रेचुलेशन जोड़ू बेटा तू भी पास हो गया
Okay, so let's look at these two labs. Now, for the new people, this tour of Google Cloud lab environments of hands-on labs is very important to try to understand the basics of Google Cloud projects and how to navigate the console, how to enable services, etc. So these are really, really fundamental skills that you need to master to complete any labs in Google Cloud. So that is why it is always the first option or first activity in any learning path, because if you can't drive the lab environment, it's very difficult to learn, right? Particularly with the ACE, because it is a very practically oriented certification, so hands-on practice is very important, right? Okay, now the second lab, creating a virtual machine. So again, you should have been able to create your Linux instance. And again, some people were asking about the machine type. It's specified there, the number of CPUs and so on. And then you just configured you can connect it into the instance to install Nginx, which is basically a popular open source web server. Now, again, some of you might have hit the problem when you tried to click on the IP address. Corporate networks sometimes don't like URLs with IP addresses in them, so you may not have been able to do that step. But if you did it from your home internet connection, you would not have a problem. It's just a security policy on your corporate networks that they typically have, right? And the rest of it, I think, was straightforward, right? So again, it is important to engage with the product, try and actively learn by completing the exercises, right? So just to wrap up today, if for those of you who have experience with Google Cloud, I would recommend you do the diagnostic questions to understand your current level of knowledge. If you don't have experience with Google Cloud, no point doing that